Hey friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and it's been a while since I've done a video like this where you've actually seen my face. If you have been around on my channel for a while, you know I tend to do more voiceover style videos, but every year around this time of year I do a pantry tour. And this year I decided that I just wasn't in the mood to do a pantry tour. I've done it for the last 4 years, and I'll link a playlist in the description that can show you all the previous year's pantry tours. And this year's really not that much different. We store a lot of the same foods every year. It looks the same down here. So if you want to get a picture of what the pantry looks like heading into winter, those videos will give you an idea of that. But I did want to do a food storage video. That's why I'm coming to you from my very dark pantry. It's in the cellar of our house. You can see there's the entrance back there. It's very dark down here. Terrible lighting for making a video. There are also a lot of noises down here from the children pitter-pattering above me upstairs, so bear with me on this. But in lieu of this year's pantry tour, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about food storage. And in light of, I know there are a lot of people out there right now that are worried about rising food costs and things, and I've been doing a lot of kind of home economics videos, kind of teaching you how to save money over the last couple months, making things from scratch. And one of the most common questions I get is, well, that's great if you have a pantry of all of those foods, but what if you're someone that doesn't have a pantry? And so I thought, you know what, that's a good idea. I want to do a video on building a pantry. Now, there are a million videos out there that can teach you this type of content, and they all sort of say the same thing. You know, there's the basic list of essentials for building a frugal pantry. They're all going to tell you, to stock up on beans because they're one of the most cost-effective forms of protein. They're all going to tell you, to get rice and oats and flour because those are the staples for all of your baking and cooking. And they're all going to say get a sweetener of some kind and a cheap fat or oil for your cooking. But this is going to be a different type of video. I will, in the video description, put a list of all of those essential items for a pantry that I do recommend, but I want to get into some more, some deeper kind of obscure tips and tricks for storing those items and for using those items in more than one way to make your money stretch. So hopefully you can find some information in this video that you can't find elsewhere in all of the other pantry essential videos out there. So if that's something that interests you, why don't you stick around? We're going to go ahead and get started. I will just give you a quick little look at what we have going on in here. It is kind of a mess, but you guys can get the gist. So we have a lot of store-bought foods over here. This is where our dried goods, a lot of them are being stored right now. And then freeze-dried food over here. Canned goods are mostly over there. Got some onions, potatoes, and squashes over here. Now, just some general food storage information before we do get started. There are 3 factors that really make a difference in your food storage, and they're the reason why we chose this cellar and why most people choose something like a root cellar or a basement to store their food. So those 3 factors are light, temperature, and humidity or moisture. So you want to, when you're storing your food, to lengthen the lifespan of that food, make it somewhere dark. This cellar is perfect because there are no windows down here. If you guys have been around here for a while, you know my food storage used to be upstairs in my kitchen where it was very bright. That was not ideal. And when we finally waterproofed this cellar, it was great to be able to bring the food down here. So the temperature down here in the summer when it's warmer out is usually somewhere around 60, 65 degrees, which isn't ideal. It's on the high end of normal for food storage. In the winter, it can get down to like 35, almost hovering on freezing down here. I have to really keep an eye on the temperature. And that is ideal. For every 10 degrees cooler that you get in your food storage, that's just maybe like 5 years longer that they say that your food will last and will stay fresh. So you really want to bring that temperature down. Light, like I said, you want to have it minimal. Light causes oxidation in your canning jars. It can change the color of it and the texture of the food and also affect the nutrient quality of it. So you really want to have less light exposure, and then moisture. Down here in our cellar, we do have a sump pump So I have to keep a dehumidifier running all the time because otherwise the moisture from that sump pump would get in the air and would affect some of the things that I store down here, like the onions and the potatoes and things. And so that dehumidifier helps keep the humidity level more stable. And it also, that dehumidifier in the winter puts off just enough heat to help keep it from freezing down here. I have nightmares sometimes of coming down here and having everything frozen over the night and all of these jars breaking. But as long as I have that dehumidifier running, when it gets below 0 here in Ohio, which doesn't happen that often, but when it does, I know that that will keep freezing from happening. So those are the 3 things that we need to start thinking about when you want to build a pantry and have ideal food storage conditions. All right, so like I said, dried beans. This is going to be the first thing everybody tells you to stock up on when you're building a pantry. And I will say that dried beans are a wonderful thing to have in your pantry if you're someone that will eat beans. All of these people will tell you to store up on beans to build a pantry, but if you're someone who never eats them, let me tell you, the things you put in your pantry, they're not going to magically become part of your diet and your meal planning just because you have them. So you're going to waste a lot of money on buying dried beans if it isn't a regular part of your meal rotation. But if you're someone who likes beans, buy them dry like this. They are cheaper than buying them canned. Now you guys know I like to can my beans, and I've done that in a lot of videos before. And the reason I like to do that is because it's a lot more convenient when you're feeding a family, a very busy family like mine, to have them pre-cooked in the jar. Let me find one here. Here's some canned garbanzo beans. It's just nice to have them cooked instead of having to take the time to soak them overnight and then the couple of hours it might take to cook them. They're pre-cooked. I can just blend that jar of garbanzo beans up and turn it into hummus within a couple of minutes, and that's great. But storing them canned like that does increase the cost because you have canning lids to factor in. So unless you're canning something specific like a hummus base or a refried bean or something that has a lot of ingredients in it, you're typically going to find that canning your dried beans doesn't really save you money unless you grew the beans yourself versus getting store-bought canned beans on sale sometime. But we do like to store dried beans too. But something that a lot of people don't talk about, when people talk about cheap protein sources like beans, they'll talk about beans and lentils as if those are the only ones, but a lot of people don't think about split peas. So, split peas have nearly as much protein in them as beans do. So in 1/4 of a cup of your dried beans, you're generally going to get 12 grams of protein. In your split peas, you're going to get 10 grams. So it's really not that much less. Lentils, you're getting about 5 grams. So these are a great source of protein. They're also extremely versatile. You can, they're not just for making soup. You can grind them down into flour. They make a great mashed potato replacer if you're someone who's trying to like lower your carbohydrates. Let's say you want to make a shepherd's pie, but you're on a diet where you don't eat potatoes. If you cook up split peas, you can cook them up and they'll be the same texture as mashed potatoes. They taste wonderful and they're a great topping for your things like mashed potato, like shepherd's pie that would have mashed potatoes on top. But the great thing about split peas compared to dried beans is they are cheaper because they're sort of this forgotten food and not a lot of people like split pea soup, so they don't think to buy them and fill their pantry with them. But they are cheaper than dried beans, which is why we always keep them in stock. I always have at least 25 pounds of them down here in my pantry, and I like to store them in these quart jars because I can just bring one of those up, soak them overnight, and then make a pot of split pea soup for my kids. We usually have it once a week because when I have done the cost calculation, this is one of the cheapest lunches that I can make for my crew. It keeps them full for forever, and they love the taste of it. So you can just add some homemade broth from some scraps that you had from another meal, throw in an onion, some garlic, some carrots, add the split peas. It is super cheap and delicious. So don't forget when you're stocking your pantry, it's not just about dried beans. Make sure you get some split peas. These are a great option for a frugal pantry. Now I'm going to bring you back here. I made the mistake, like I mentioned before, don't buy beans if you're not going to eat a bunch of them because they'll just sit here in storage. And a couple years ago I made the mistake of buying 25 pounds of lima beans because I thought lima beans are good for you. They're really cheap. I got them on sale for almost a steal and I thought I'm going to add these to my pantry and just force myself to eat more of them. Well, guess what? Since they're not part of my usual rotation, they just have kind of been sitting here in storage as an emergency backup of food, I guess. And as they sit here in storage, they get old. So beans don't necessarily go bad. Like, they're not going to spoil unless they've been exposed to moisture where they started to sprout, and then they might get moldy or something. But if they're kept dry, they're not necessarily going to go bad or expire or anything like that. They're just going to get old. And you'll know that your beans are old if when you soak them, they wrinkle up. And these lima beans wrinkle up terribly when you soak them because that's how old they are. If you do have old beans, the only thing that's going to mean is that they're going to take a little longer to cook, so you need to account for that. Don't use your usual cooking time for older dried beans. You're going to want to add like an extra 30 minutes or more. If they are old, what you can do is add a little bit of baking soda to the cooking water or the soaking water, and that alkalinity will help cook them faster. It will bring them back to life, I guess, so that they don't take as long to cook. So don't make my mistake and buy 25 pounds of lima beans if you're not going to eat them. And so I need to do a better job this winter of trying to incorporate these into some meals. I find I do better if I can them and they're pre-cooked. If I have a day where I'm just looking for a side dish, I'll grab a side dish of some canned lima beans and add them to the plates with the children, for the children. But otherwise, if you have lima bean ideas, put them in the comments because I need them. Alright guys, how about rice? Of course, rice is going to be staple on everybody's pantry list. Cultures around the world have been eating rice since the beginning of time because it's such a great way to stretch your meals and it really fills you up. So we store rice down here in the root cellar. I always like to keep like 25 pounds or so on hand. We usually keep sushi rice because that's a treat I like to make my kids. And we also keep white rice in storage. Now, is brown rice nutritionally superior to white rice? Absolutely. But there is a reason why I don't buy brown rice in bulk and store it down here in my cellar. It's because brown rice actually has a shorter shelf life. Brown rice has oils in it, and those oils are what make it more nutritional for you, better for your body. However, because it has oils in it, it goes rancid much more quickly. So if you buy a big bulk of brown rice, I would only suggest that if you're going to go through that big bag in the next 6 months or so. If you're buying rice for really long-term storage, you want to focus on white rice. It does not contain the oils, and it will last longer, like forever, on your shelves. Just like with your dried beans, your rice isn't necessarily going to go bad. It isn't going to expire. It just might not taste as fresh the longer it sits in storage. Let's say you have 2-year-old rice that's down here and you cook it and it just doesn't taste fresh. What you can do is toast the rice for a little bit in the oven before you cook it up. And that toasting gives it like a nutty flavor that makes it taste almost fresh again. It's really delicious. It kind of revives that stale rice and makes it taste good. So that's what I would do if you have old rice that you're maybe not enjoying as much as something fresher. Now, another reason that rice is a great staple to have in your pantry is because it's multi-purpose. A lot of people are going to, make stir fry with their rice. They're just going to make a side dish with their rice. But rice can be ground down into a flour, which is great for gluten-free baking. In fact, if you're going to buy one of these expensive flours like Bob's Red Mill 1-for-1 to make gluten-free foods, just know that those are primarily rice flour. Maybe with a little bit of sorghum flour or oat flour or something like that you want to add to it, and then some kind of binder like a guar gum or a xanthan gum. You could even use egg in your baking to bind it together. So you're paying way too much for those 1-to-1 flours that are essentially just rice flour. It's much cheaper to buy your bulk white rice. If you have a grain mill or a Vitamix mixer, you can blend that down, make a delicious rice flour that you can use for your gluten-free baking at a fraction of the cost. I've been making my own gluten-free flours for a really long time, and it saves me a lot of money. Another thing, if you're dairy-free and you purchase your rice in bulk like this, you can make a really easy rice milk out of your white rice like this. So I love putting things in my pantry like that are very multi-purpose. So you don't just have the rice to eat as a side dish. I can make gluten-free flour. I can also make a dairy-free milk out of this one item in my pantry. Now, just like with your rice, oats are another great multi-purpose item if you let them be. For the same thing with the rice, you can grind whole oat groats if you're purchasing them in the whole form down into oat flour. If you have gluten-free oats, that would provide a gluten-free flour for you at a fraction of the cost of buying pre-ground gluten-free flour. Just know that if you do have a grain mill, you can't run rolled oats through it. Because these oat groats have an oil in them that once they're rolled, it kind of like gums up your grain mill, and you might ruin the motor of that. So stick to oat groats. And sticking to the oat groats is a great idea for other reasons too, because they're much more multi-purpose. You can grind them into flour. You can do steel cut oats out of them. You can roll them if you have an oat roller into something like an old-fashioned oat. You can make oat milk out of them. Just such a versatile item to have, and they store much longer in the whole form of the groats versus how they store if they are rolled. These regular rolled oats can store like 10 to 30 years if they're stored properly, and that would mean not being exposed to moisture, because the moisture, obviously, they could mold when they're in storage, but if they're somewhere nice and dry and cool and kept in the dark, ideally in something like a Mylar bag with an oxygen absorber for long-term storage, those are going to last you forever. Now, if you do have rolled oats in storage, that's wonderful too. They are convenient to have. Just know that oats tend to absorb odors, and so you do want to make sure they're in something airtight, maybe vacuum sealed. Don't buy like the Quaker Oats cardboard boxes of rolled oats and throw them down in your pantry next to something like where you're storing your onions or other potentially stinky items. Like I have apple scrap vinegar brewing down here that can give off an odor, and if I were to put my oats right next to that, they might absorb some of the odor of that vinegar and might not taste extremely pleasant. So that's just something to keep in mind in storing your oats. Salt is another item. You want to have a lot of it in your pantry, but salt, just like oats, is a huge odor absorber. So for the same reason I said not to store your oats next to those items, don't store your salt there. So if your salt came in some kind of cardboard or even plastic container, I would switch it to something glass like this. Never use metal for your salt. Salt will corrode metal over time. In fact, I wouldn't recommend using canning lids like this for salt if you're not going to go through this salt in a reasonable amount of time. This jar like this we could go through in a few months. I'm not worried about it corroding the metal in that amount of time. But if I had a really big bulk amount, I would not want to have a metal lid on that. I would use a big 5-gallon bucket or something like that and have it double sealed in the plastic and the 5-gallon bucket. A little cost saving tip for if you're someone you want to buy quality salt, like a really quality pink Himalayan or something like a Redmond's real salt or Celtic sea salt, something like that, and the price is kind of like off-putting to you. Just know that you can generally get it cheaper if you buy it in the coarse salt form. Coarse salt is obviously not something that you're going to want to use to sprinkle on your food after it's already cooked, but you can use the coarse salt if you're cooking like a big batch of soup. You can throw the coarse salt in, but what we like to do is grind it down using a mortar and pestle. I do have a big 5-gallon bucket of coarse salt here, and that's what I have started buying instead of the finer ground salt, because it's about 11% cheaper at places like Azure Standard to get the same type of salt in the coarse ground versus this. And my kids love, there's something about grinding it themselves that they love, so I'll just throw a little bit in there when we get low on salt. They'll grind it down, and then we'll put it in the salt shaker. It takes like 2 minutes to grind it down. It would take even less if you have a high-powered blender. You could throw large amounts of those rock salts in there, grind it down quickly, and you could have it in this form in no time at all and save yourself about 10% on your more expensive salts. All right, guys, let's talk about oils and fats. So my favorite, cheapest oils that I store would be upstairs in our overflow fridge. That would be our home-rendered tallow or lard. I keep that in the refrigerator because it extends the shelf life. If we are going to bring it down here and put it on the shelves, there is a higher chance of it spoiling. They do not recommend that. You want to, unless you're going to use it up probably in the next 3 to 6 months. If you want to extend the life longer than that, keep it somewhere cold, either in a fridge or a freezer. Our other oils like olive oil and avocado oil, we do keep down here. These oils like this too, they can go in the freezer and they're going to do just fine. That will not destroy your oils. So if you have a lot of them that you're not going to go through in the next, I mean, we are a really large family and I cook a lot. This oil will be gone in the next 3 months, so it's fine down here. But if you're storing a large quantity of oil for a really long time, maybe longer than 3 months, you might want to put it in the freezer, especially if it comes in a clear bottle like this. Ideal storage for fats and oils would be a darker, an amber colored glass or a green glass like this. These cheaper oils that are in the lighter, the see-through plastic tubs, I guess, or even glass, those are more likely to go rancid because light does oxidize the oils and they go rancid faster. So that's just something to consider. Freeze these if you're not going to use them up quickly because they are much more likely to go rancid. Okay, one of the biggest reasons that I keep oils like this here, there are some things that when we're deep frying, let's say if we're making like potato chips, I choose to fry that in home rendered tallow or lard because it's much cheaper oil. But sometimes I don't want to make donuts that are fried in tallow. They give a little bit of a beefy flavor. So I will use these oils right here for frying. That can be rather expensive. So just to let you know, if you do use an oil like this for frying and you want to reuse it, one of the best ways to do that is to take a slice of a potato and drop it into the used oil, and that potato will start to absorb some of the like burnt parts of the oil, the charred parts of the oil, and will help it retain freshness so that you can reuse it later. Down here, another staple that you're going to need in any pantry are your leavening agents. That's going to be your yeast, your baking soda, your baking powder, the things that are going to help all of your wonderful baked goods and breads rise nicely. So we keep baking powder down here. We do have our baking soda down here. Now our yeast, we make sure to keep in the freezer. If you buy a bulk amount of yeast and you separate it down into smaller containers, make sure that you store that in the freezer because it does go bad. So when you're ready to use it, you can just pull it out of the freezer and it's ready to go. But otherwise, if it's a small amount like this and you're going to use your baking powder within the next 6 months or so, it's fine to just keep down here where it's nice and cool in the root cellar, and that'll do just fine. Baking soda, yes, it can go bad and it can lose its alkalinity over time. If you find that that's the case with your baking soda, just know that you can stick that in the oven on 350 degrees for about 10 minutes, and that process helps restore that alkalinity and it'll be just fine again. But just like with our other items like the oats and our salts and things, baking soda can absorb odors. If you're buying them in the little cardboard cartons, don't put them down here in your cellar in the cardboard. It might absorb the odors of the room. You are going to want to switch that to something that's airtight, like a canning jar or some other container like that. Okay guys, let's talk about our potatoes. This is where we store our potatoes down here in the cellar, and we do not store our apples down here, and that's for many reasons. They do better in an overflow fridge upstairs, and that is because you don't want to store apples and potatoes right next to one another. Apples and things like bananas and even onions can put off an ethylene gas that will cause these potatoes to sprout faster, and that is not ideal for the storage. So while we do have onions down here, I keep them kind of up and over there, and normally this cart is pushed over here, and so the potatoes are far enough away that that isn't an issue down here. So just make sure that you store those apples kind of, if you have to put them all in the same space, away from them, not right next to each other, so that those gases won't affect your potatoes. Something you can do to prevent sprouting in your potatoes is to take some mint leaves, a large amount of mint leaves, before the frost kills them, if it's not too late where you are. Take some of those and put them, once they're dried, down in your potato containers, and there's something in that mint that helps prevent sprouting in your potatoes. If you're one of those people that has to have your apples and your potatoes, or your onions and potatoes in the same general space for storage, something that you can do is take a piece of charcoal and put it in your potato bin. That will help absorb some of those ethylene gases. It also will help absorb any odors around the area. So hopefully that can help you out in that case. Potatoes are one thing that temperature will really affect. If your temperature in your storage area is above 50 degrees, those potatoes are going to break their dormancy and they're going to begin to sprout. So that is why after you harvest your potatoes, hopefully your root cellar is cooler than 50 degrees. It's the perfect place to keep them. Make sure it's dark down there. If you do have windows in your basement where you store your food, I would get some blackout curtains and things. That'll prevent them from turning green, because you know that we don't want green potatoes. We also don't want sprouted potatoes. They're not ideal. And so temperature and exposure to light is really the key to having a successful potato storage. Another tip for potato storage: if you don't have any mint plants, you didn't get out there and catch them before the last frost, take a few drops of clove oil on a cotton ball and throw that in your potato bin. There's something about the clove oil that is supposed to help with your sprouting as well. Okay guys, so hopefully you enjoyed some of those little tips and tricks. If you'd like more content like that of just tips for food storage, I have a ton of them about other items. I just wanted to hit some of the main ones on your maybe top 10 pantry essential list. So let me know in the comments if this is something that you like, and I could do some more videos sharing my tips like this. Yesterday, the farmers took down the cornfields that are directly beside our house, and so it is that time of year where once the corn comes down, all the mice and critters that were in the fields start scurrying and looking for their winter home. So this is the time of year where we need to start looking at critter prevention, which is one of the top questions I get whenever I talk about my pantry. We live in a very old farmhouse. We're surrounded by fields. The occasional guest in our pantry is going to happen every now and then. So we do have to take some preventative measures. Something that I have found that is a more holistic thing: mice do not like the smell of mint. So if you're putting that mint down with your potatoes, that's wonderful. The best way to do it is to get like a peppermint essential oil, put it on cotton balls, place it all around. It will make your cellar or your pantry smell amazing, and the critters tend to not like that. But it is something you have to apply the oil to those cotton balls just about every week. So place those cotton balls in areas where you can see them, and remember, keep your little bottle of oil down in the pantry, and every time you come down once a week, just sprinkle some new oil on those cotton balls, and that helps. Otherwise, you're going to have to set some traps, whichever ones you feel comfortable with, depending on how you feel about different types of traps. If you want to catch and release, if that's your thing. If not, find the ones that might be a little more effective, and you're going to need to place that. Wherever there's food and the field's coming down, it's going to be an issue. So other than that, other types of pests, what we do, you can make sure you freeze all of your grains and things for at least 3 days, 2 to 3 days before you store them. So what I do is I freeze them when I get the bags from Azure Standard, freeze them for my 2 to 3 days, take them out, let them completely thaw for a day, and then package them up. And that prevents most pests that could be in the food. Something else that you can do is take a bay leaf and stick that in your jars or your 5-gallon buckets. That's supposed to prevent a lot of pests like weevils and moths and things. They don't like the smell of that bay leaf. Other than that, I think that's about it when it comes to pests that we do. Having some cats around is probably going to be the best deterrent for mice in your space. But if you can't have cats around, I would just say place some traps and pray for the best. So, all right, guys, that's about it. My children have been very loud throughout this video upstairs. They are playing right now. So hopefully they haven't destroyed the house. I'm going to go up and check now and see what they've been up to. But we'll be back next week with another video. Until then, I hope you guys have a wonderful week. We'll see you, friends. Bye.